to another episode of Words That Kill. Today's guest is fantasy author Brie Tart, and we're going to be discussing Murderous Betrayal. Won't that be fun? So I'm going to turn it over to her now and let her introduce herself. So take it away.
Hi, like she said, I'm Brie Tart, fantasy author. I like writing stuff for teens and adults with touches of mythology and folklore in it. And lots of times that includes royal intrigue and backstabbing and, epic deaths and battles and all that jazz. And you can find me at brietart.com if you want to find out more.
Okay, so when you're crafting a killer from a trusted ally, how do you go about doing that?
Well, to really make it believable, at least in my opinion, there's two ways of doing it. You can either make them sympathetic from the get-go and really seed in that motivation, and then it comes as more of a surprise, but a logical one when it does happen. Either that, or it can be obvious from the start and make them, and that's got to be pulled off early, though, in my opinion. Otherwise, it's just you're stringing somebody along, they already see it coming, and then it's just like, okay, now we can get on with the actual villainy after that instead of pretending.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So when you're crafting the victim that dies from this betrayal, because we're talking about killing characters here, how do you go about choosing your victim?
Well, my personal philosophy is it should be someone significant to your main hero or someone significant to the person that you should be feeling sympathy for. Good example from one of my series, Exiles of Ire. There was let's just say, a very bad relationship between the two, and it went south very bad, and the person who did the betrayal holds a grudge. Another probably better example is also going back to the point of there being a sentimental connection in my Heart of Hellfire series. And this is spoilers for anyone who cares, but the main character is betrayed by someone very close to her because the only family she has left gets murdered by them, and that person also has a lot of other secrets and stuff, and it has more of an impact because of that emotional connection that they have, and hopefully that the reader has too.
So when you're turning a good guy or someone the reader supposed was a good guy into an antagonist by this betrayal, what kind of consequences do you usually like to play with?
Well, I like to play with the consequences on the relationship between the betrayer and the betrayee. So, if they're close, which is the way I like to go with, I like really digging into that angst. If a close friend, a close family, someone you thought was behind you, who you trusted, breaks that trust in any way, especially if it ends in, backstabbing for the person figuratively and another person literally, then it's going to have a lot of trauma responses. It's going to have a lot of, interior conflicts. And, it also, you got to see about the person's motivations and, how does that play? And a lot of times the result's either going to be, is the person going to hold a grudge, not forgive them, and get revenge? Or is the person going to forgive them and try to get them on a redemption arc? So it's fun to play with.
Okay, so once the main character is betrayed, it of course has an effect on their trust of people in general. So how do you work that into their other relationships, the consequences of that?
Well, it's gonna affect other relationships because if one person can turn against them, what about the other people in their life or in their circle? Who can they really depend on? Can they only depend on themselves? It can be very isolating, I imagine. Lots of times, though, depending on how solid the other relationships are, it just really depends on the support system that they've built. If there's more intrigue, then yeah, they're going to be isolated and they're going to be questioning everyone, every look, every movement. If they have a more solid trust with other people, then maybe it's a one-off thing. Maybe it's going to take a couple betrayals for them to get to that point. So there really seems to be a range with that surprise.
Okay. So, how would you handle it if your protagonist is the one that did the betraying?
That one is a lot trickier to pull off. Um, I I kind of did that in a little bit, in that the betrayal happened and then the betrayer became a protagonist and got their own point of view chapters. That is difficult because if you're going to do that from the get-go, you have to seed that in. And if you want it to be a surprise, then it really has to be subtle foreshadowing. If it has to be overt, then there should be some conflict in them questioning, like the situation where you have somebody who is, let's say, an assassin who has to infiltrate somewhere to get to their victim. Uh, well, they've got to earn the victim's trust. Well, what if they start to actually like the victim? And, that's something that really makes you think, oh, are they actually going to go through with this? What's it going to look like to them? What are going to be the repercussions? It's got to have that conflict and that intrigue, or it's got to have that surprise to really work, or else it's just kind of, okay, why should we care? You don't want any reader to have that reaction.
That's definitely true. So, how do you use betrayal as a plot motivation for your protagonist?
Well, if the betrayer is the protagonist, then, that just goes to the former question. But if usually they're not the protagonist, usually there's someone close, and it can really be a good driving conflict, or it can be a good obstacle that they have to overcome, because that kind of jarring incident can really make someone freeze in place, because either they're feeling the isolation, we talked about before, or they're going to try to pursue the person who betrayed them, getting back at them as their new goal. And it's really tricky and depends on what's been established so far, and what kind of character that is. But it's got to have a change that happens in their motivation. It's got to really affect it. It's either got to affirm it and make it more determined, or it's got to change it, make them question it, and go a different direction, I think.
So, for the motivation for the antagonist, how do you make the betrayal believable so it doesn't seem like it's just out of left field?
Well, that requires a lot of seeding, foreshadowing. One of those betrayals I was talking about earlier in the Exiles of Ire series, that character forms a really strong relationship with the protagonist from the beginning. It starts off a little rocky, but then you get to know her. You get to know her trauma. You get to know, the bad relationship she's been in. You get to know really her background. And I think that's the key, is, really showing examples of how far they will go to get what they want, or how far they will go to do what they believe in. And really seeding in that ruthlessness is good for hinting without totally giving away the surprise when they actually do betray it. You think, oh yeah, but they trust this person, they're their friend or their lover or their ally. Like in the Exiles of Ire example, they get pretty close. They actually start having feelings for each other, and yet when the betrayal does happen and it ends in that death, there's like such a jarring violation of trust. It's best if you can go back and read and be like, oh, I should have seen that coming. But you don't, because, you don't want to. You don't want to see it coming, because there should be that bond with the character formed by then.
Definitely. So, when you're betraying your protagonist, you've got a built-in sympathy. So how do you, for lack of a better word, milk the sympathy?
Well, again, you dig into their backstory, you dig into their trauma, you dig into their motivations. Did they have a horrible childhood? Did they have, something? Were they brainwashed? Were they blackmailed? There's a lot of different reasons why somebody could do the betrayal, and a lot of it is going to be explored after the reveal, honestly, when they dig deeper into their motivations. And sometimes, they don't necessarily need the sympathy, in my opinion. Like, someone can betray just because they believe in something so strongly that, they want power. They have this goal. They're going to do anything to do it, and the protagonist can't just be a consequence.
Okay, so how do you handle sympathy for your protagonist who has been betrayed?
With that one's easier, I think, and I may have misunderstood the question. Sorry.
No, it's okay. We got a little extra.
Yeah. For the protagonist who was betrayed, for milking that sympathy, you really dig into their feelings on it. They're going to dwell on it, like, questioning everybody around them, really questioning themselves. Did I make this happen? Did something I do make them think differently of me? There's a lot that goes into it, and really exploring that, not just in a scene where they're, right as rain and plucky the next scene. No, it really needs to be a big revelation, I think, and bringing it up and consistently bringing them in a conflict with the person who betrayed them, whether it's a ghost, a memory, or an in-person fight or argument or confrontation, is also something good because it keeps scraping at that wound. So whatever excuse you can get to scrape at that wound, it's going to garner that sympathy, and it's going to increase the tension.
Okay, so how would you handle it if your protagonist actually kind of deserved being betrayed?
If the protagonist deserved being betrayed, then, well, it depends on what kind of a narrator or point of view the protagonist has. Like, if they're supposed to be one of those unreliable ones that you're not supposed to feel sympathy for, that you're just supposed to be kind of mildly entertained, then okay, you'll laugh when they get betrayed because, they should have seen it coming. Kind of like a Chicago. You don't really care about the victims because they had it coming. And with the other way, though, when maybe they are ignorant of how they're acting, they're the ones being ruthless. They're the ones who are doing something that, screws over people around them, having them learn that lesson because of the betrayal, because of the consequences of their own actions. That can be a really good character moment for, maybe not necessarily going into redemption arc, but going into a new form of growth. And that's a great opportunity too. So it's a great trope because you can play so much with it.
Okay, and speaking of tropes, betrayal does come with its own set of tropes, its own set of pitfalls too. So how do you go about avoiding them, and what kind of new twists do you add to them?
Well, I like relying on the classics a lot of times and, giving shades of what came before. But the biggest way to subvert them, I think, is honestly listening to the characters, making sure they are fleshed out, and letting them organically flow from the experiences. I am a discovery writer, pantser is what a lot of people call it. So a lot of times I'll follow the characters, they tell me what to do, and whatever happens, including the betrayals, flows from that. And, it makes it more interesting because there is that investment, there is that depth, there's that exploration. So it makes things that may seem cliche not feel as cliche, and the tropes can, be flipped on their heads, or they can actually go, serve a good purpose.
You touched on this a little bit, but how do you handle the foreshadowing the betrayal? What kind of specifics do you usually get into?
Going back to the Exiles of Ire one I reference, that character, you see from the get-go that she holds a grudge. You see from the get-go that she has a lot of trauma in her past, that her people skills are not the best, that she's really prickly. And, when you explore more about who she is, what she does, where she's been, you get to see where she's going a lot more, where, okay, so she's capable of all these things, but she wouldn't do that to the protagonist, right? Because, the protagonist is the exception. But then turns out the protagonist isn't necessarily the exception, because this person will go to any lengths to get that grudge. They just can't give it up. And the Heart of Hellfire series, that one is a little more heavy-handed with the betrayal, because it's a bit of a mystery, but at the same time, making it obvious to the reader, but making the main character in a sense of denial, like I try to do in that series, I think heightens the emotion of it more, because it seems a little too obvious from the get-go, so that sows some doubt. She discovers this dramatic thing, and then the person who betrays her is gone. The person comes back alone, not with the family that he set off with. So, and then he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I tried to stop it. He's dead." So, that, with discovering all these secrets and discovering suspicious things, like she finds a secret identity that he has and evidence that he's part of the big scary world that she has to explore now to come back to the bottom of the mystery and find out his motivations, like planting things like that too, like around, to really reinforce and drive home the fact, when it does come out, that, oh, this person did betray you, oh, this person is really like this. It helps. If it seems too obvious, people might doubt it, and then when it does drive home, it can make more of an impact, because if the character is in denial the entire time, the reader's like, come on, you get this, and you see that anguish. That's another way to milk it too.
Yeah, would it be fair to say that you play a little bit with readers' expectations of character types?
I do like to do that. Slightly unrelated note, in the Heart of Hellfire series, the main character is a very muscular, likes to work out, knows a few martial arts, biker mom, and her partner and the father of her child is a really short, really geeky house dad. And both of them are very liberal in their relationship, like open relationship kind of thing. But he turns out to be this, a lot more than he seems. And, somebody else that becomes an ally of hers is also this, stuck up, nerdy librarian type. And both of them are guys, both of them have some action roles. And you don't usually see like the cinnamon roll who can kick your ass. I like playing with archetypes like that. With the Exiles of Ire series, the main character is a punk. She is also plus size, and she also has Hispanic heritage, and the other protagonist is, a guy. He's one of those enchanting fairy male types, but he's also very effeminate. So, playing with those expectations is honestly fun, and it makes the characters deeper for me because, again, borrowing from those tropes, but, trying to subvert them a bit and freshen them up.
Yeah, cool. So, when you're dealing with reader satisfaction, how do you give them the unexpected twist but still make it a surprise?
That is definitely a balancing act, because really making it a surprise and really making it that punch to the gut requires a lot of that emotional investment. My technique is spending time with the characters, really building their relationship, really building that sense of tension and, conflict. And then when it comes out of left field, and it seems to be, it's a bigger punch in the gut, it's a bigger surprise, because again, the emotional investment. And that's the biggest thing. The characters will always create that surprise, create that tension, create that investment to me. If it's just, a fun plot with a few clever logic things, it can be fun as a set piece. But if I don't care about the characters, then I'm not going to get attached to the plot or the world or the story. I mean, I have 3-starred or DNF'd a lot of books that had really great world building, really great potential possibilities. but I just couldn't get into the characters. Either they were Mary Sue's or Gary Stu's, or they were just behaving so entitled, or they were being so stupid, or, there's a lot of reasons that can break that bond that a reader has with the person who's taking them through a story. Either that or, like, okay, Scrubs is a good example where the main character, JD, has what I like to call protagonist syndrome, where he is annoying, he is whiny, he is very entitled. The only reason I made it through the first seasons of that show, besides the funny fantasies and good humor, was because the side characters were so strong, because their personalities really made me bond with them, especially Dr. Cox and Turk, who are, the main mentor and best friend figures in JD's life.
Yeah, I've watched a few shows like that too. Okay, so sometimes the betrayer is very obvious because the protagonist has to trust the bad guy or someone who's not so savory for the sake of the story. So how do you handle that? Is it more straightforward?
That one, it's kind of like where it seems obvious at first because, oh, come on, you've got to see it coming. And it helps up the tension because you have the characters' uncertainty, you have them getting familiar with each other, you have that kind of rivals. I mean, with romances, you see this a lot where it's like rivals to lovers. And then usually in romances, it's a misunderstanding. But I like it when it doesn't pull the punch and the person betrays them anyways because... But, you can tell that they feel bad about it. Or, then there's the question after it happens, how is this going to be resolved? Can it be resolved? Can we get back what we had? And that's really fun for me as a reader, but also as a writer. I haven't written a story like that necessarily yet. But, usually I like the betrayals to be at least unknown, like those team ups where it's an alliance of convenience. I do like those to work out where the person who you can't seem to trust turns out to be the biggest ally in the end, and I like flipping the expectation and following through with that. But as a reader, I do enjoy stories where the villain is the villain, they are who they are, and I do kind of like that resolution, though, at the end where, maybe they had a good reason for the betrayal. Maybe it was a more sympathetic reason, like blackmail, or maybe they just couldn't let go of an old wound or something, and then there's a healing that happens afterwards. I am a big fan of redemption arcs, but, not every character needs one, and sometimes they just need a good death.
Yeah, there's so many swords you can use. They're very versatile.
Exactly. And that's why I like sticking with the classics.
Okay. Well, thank you for being a guest today. It was a pleasure chatting with you. It was a wonderful episode.
Yep. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. And
okay. And
thanks, everybody.
That's it for this episode of Words That Kill. And join us for another one and some other time. And that's all for now. Bye.